In this video, I'll be finding out which of these 9 winter SUV tyres is best for your own needs. So how is this test any different from the regular winter tyre test I uploaded probably about a week ago? These winter tyres are the SUV variants of their normal brothers. That means they've been developed more to cope with the demands a heavier, higher centre of gravity SUV will place on them. That and this VW Tiguan R I'll be using not only has 320 horsepower, but it's also all-wheel drive. So that puts a different demand through the tyre set. As always, I will be testing the dry, wet and snow of these tyres and looking at the noise comfort and rolling resistance of the tyres to give you a complete picture of their performance qualities to help you decide which of these tyres is best for your own driving need. Should be a really interesting test. Let's get on with the testing. Now, we often shy away from using all-wheel drive vehicles for tyre testing because they tend to flatter bad tyres and group everything together. But this Tiguan with its all-wheel drive or fraud-wheel drive, if you want to call it that, has actually been quite entertaining and done a good job of separating the tyres. And before I start, I know I'm going to be talking about oversteer and understeer and sideways steer and sliding the car around. This isn't realistic. I'm aware that this isn't a performance winter tyre test. This is an SUV winter tyre test. So the actual scoring I'll be used is based on grip and safety quality, not sliding quality. Slowest tyre of the test was of course the budget tyre. Now don't just think I'm being mean about a cheap tyre again, because I had this same brand in my winter tyre test and it was actually pretty good in the snow. But in this application, it felt like an all-season tyre, not a very good one at that. You just had low amounts of grip. You could have fun with the tyre, but that's mostly because of the all-wheel drive system. If this car had been front-wheel drive, I think the gap would have been even bigger, but it finished 15% behind their best. And in tyre testing terms these days, 15% is a huge amount. The Maxxis was the next tyre, only about 8% off the best, so you can see it's already a lot closer to the front, but also still quite far away from the best. Now, this tyre just had huge amounts of understeering. You just couldn't quite tell where the limit of grip was. So when you were getting to the corner and turning in, you were hesitating a lot, wondering, oh, am I going to have grip, aren't I? And it was a bit of a lottery. Next up was Bridgestone. This tyre did have a little bit more understeer than the best, but less than the Maxxis, and it felt pretty good under traction. So we're getting into the good winter tyre territory here. The next group of tyres was Nokian, Hankook and Pirelli. All these tyres were just 1% off each other, and all of them very good winter tyres. They just had a little bit of extra front bite that I haven't had with any of the previous tyres, which gave you loads more confidence to push the car on and turn into the corner and really understand what was going on below you. If I had to pick one as my favourite of the three, it'd be the Nokian by the smallest margins, just because it felt the most rounded in terms of balance, and as it was sliding, it was probably the quickest to recover. The next pair of tyres were excellent winter tyres. That was the Continental and Goodyear. Both of these felt very similar to the previous group. They just had a little bit more grip, although the Goodyear perhaps picked up a little bit more understeer than I'd want for a flying lap. That is, as I've said in other videos, a safe balance, so we can't downgrade it for that. And finally, the fastest tyre on test. Would you believe it? It's the Michelin Pilot Alpine 5 SUV. Now, I'm a little bit annoyed about this, not because Michelin have made another good tyre, absolute respect to the French company, it's because the other tyre manufacturers still haven't caught up. And I don't like sounding like an absolute stuck record just going on about how Michelin are really great in the snow. I have the latest tyres from Pirelli, Nokian, we have Continental's greatest, we have a great tyre from Goodyear and other manufacturers, and they're still almost in a different category than this Michelin. I don't know what Michelin are doing with the Pilot Alpine range. I probably said these exact words in my winter video, I can't remember, I filmed it last week. But it just finds grip where no other tyre could find grip. It gives you a little bit more on that front axle, and it gives you just a better lap time. And it really is such an amazing product for winter. I just hope Michelin haven't put all their eggs in the snow basket and forgotten about dry and wet, but we shall see in a second. Finally, if you want to see how an all-season and summer tyre will compare to a winter tyre, go watch my normal car winter tyre test video that's on the channel. It should have been out last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, as that has a very good all-season and a very good summer tyre in it on snow to give you that balance. Let's move on to traction and braking.
The Michelin was again best in snow traction, narrowly beating the Pirelli and Bridgestone to have the fastest acceleration time. Snow braking saw the Hankook jump up to the best in test, with the Nokian just 0.3% behind. Again, the Michelin was in the top 3, cementing it as the best tyre in the snow. the budget tyre was over 20% worse than the best in both traction and braking. Another reminder of you get what you pay for.
Wet handling. As I said in the snow part of the video, all-wheel drive vehicles can often compress the results, and wet handling is incredibly close. This is one of the closest wet handling groups I've ever had. But as all the tyres are pretty good tyres, I don't think it would be that much different on a front-wheel drive SUV, although this Tiguan is pretty good fun. Now, there was one bad tyre of the group, and that was the Lao, but it wasn't even that bad. It was just a little bit less than 5% off the very best, but subjectively, it wasn't quite as close. Oversteer was its biggest problem. Most of these tyres are set up alike the vehicle. The vehicle has small amounts of understeer. Some tyres gave it more understeer, some less. But the Lao, the budget tyre, was the only one that gave it oversteer, and quite snappy oversteer. So while as a test driver on track, I really enjoyed the challenge, and it was my favourite to drive from a personal point of view. It's definitely not a tyre I'd put my dad on the open road. There's a very big difference, so it's not the tyre to pick. Maxxis was next, just 2% off the best. And conversely to the Lao, this was probably the loveliest tyre to drive. Why? Well, it gave the car just a little bit of understeer, which is kind of what you want from a tyre. Understeer is safe, but you don't want too much. The steering response was good for a winter tyre. Remember, these are winter tyres, and winter tyres often struggle to give you good steering response. And you even got a little bit of feedback from the front axle, which again is a bit of a rarity in the world of winter tyres. So impressive job for Maxxis. While it wasn't the fastest, we're talking 1.9% or something off the best. Impressive. I want to see how this does in braking, which is coming soon. Nokian was next, now just 1.5% off the best. Like, what an incredibly close group of tyres. The Nokian, like the Maxxis, was a nice tyre to drive. There wasn't anything outstanding about the Nokian, it just did everything you expected it to do. So good job Nokian. This is their new Snowproof 2 SUV tyre. They've done a good job for wet handling subjectively, that's for sure. Bridgestone and Hankook essentially tied next, just 1% off the fastest lap. Now, the Bridgestone was one of these tyres that I didn't really enjoy driving because huge amounts of understeer. And like I say, understeer is safe for the road, but I think this level of understeer is just a little bit much. You really struggled on corner entry, but the grip was good and it felt good on the brakes, so we'll see how that does in the braking. Hankook, like the Nokian, nothing outstanding, like hugely outstanding. The Hankook did have a kind of heavier steering response, which I appreciated, but everything else it did, turn in mid-corner, corner exit, just a little bit of understeer. You could predict where the car was going, and it was a nice tyre to drive. The top four tyres were separated by 0.4%, which is almost margin of error for this kind of test. When you think about it, that's 4 sets of tyres, 4 laps I do for each, and then I average it out. So that's 16 laps I've done. On average, they all average with 0.4% difference across a near a minute lap, and you can see how much I'm working at the wheel. There's lots of brakings, lots of accelerations, lots of corners, so this is incredibly close. I'm flabbergasted. The order was Michelin, Continental, Goodyear and Pirelli, with Pirelli being the fastest and Michelin being the slowest of the group, although slowest really is the wrong word to use considering how close it is. The Michelin, it had monster grip, felt very good on the brakes, but like the Bridgestone, it just picked up a little bit too much understeer in the corners. That's not a quality I particularly like from a driving point of view, but as I've said before, it's safe. The Continental, conversely, felt probably the most performance-y of all the winter tyres, but it did result in the tyre being a little bit twitchy around the limit. So while you could have fun tipping it in and you could have a little bit of oversteer if you wanted, as demonstrating now, it perhaps isn't the very ideal tyre for the road. But again, I keep on having to stress this. I'm talking about tiny, tiny differences. Goodyear was next. The Goodyear was just a solid all-round tyre, probably the second favourite, I mean very, very close margins, probably my second favourite after the Maxxis, because it felt a lot like the Maxxis. It just did everything you expected it to, and just a little bit extra at points. And then the fastest tyre by the smallest of margins was the Pirelli. Now that actually surprised me when going through the data, because I don't really generally work out who's the fastest or slowest as I'm going through it, because I just like to ignore it all and concentrate on driving. And the Pirelli, for the notes, I said it didn't feel quite as strong as some of the other tyres around it on the brakes, and again, small margins, but it did feel very good on like corner entry and corner exit, so maybe this is the Pirelli motorsport heritage coming through. But I'm going to slow down and say this. the top 4 tyres especially, there's almost nothing in it. You'd be so happy with any of them on the road. In fact, everything down to maxes you'd be happy with. Avoid the budget maybe, because I don't think I want people oversteering around on corners on the road. Maybe that's just me, but I don't want that around me, and I certainly wouldn't put it on me. But everything from the maxes up has been very, very good in wet handling. So fingers crossed, wet braking gives us a little bit more difference, and let's go look at the results.
Wet braking was also incredibly close. This time Michelin proved to be the best, with the Bridgestone less than 0.5% behind. The Continental, Hankook and Goodyear all performed extremely well, proving that this is a very close group of tyres. There was, however, one clear winner in aquaplaning. That was the Nokian Snowproof 2 SUV, winning both straight and curved aquaplaning, with the Bridgestone Blizzak LM005 and Hankook Winter iSept Evo 3X also proving to be great in the deeper water.
If you want to take your SUV on a track day using winter tyres, firstly I suggest you don't, but if you have to, because I'm sure there's one of you that's going to do this, fit the Pirelli Maxxis or Hankook. And I know that's probably the consumer advice you're all watching this video for. Apart from that, there's really not that much to talk about. Dry handling isn't overly relevant to a winter tyre, but I did lots of lane change exercises to work out stability front and rear on this Tiguan. And actually, as this Tiguan is 50-50 weight distribution, so it's 2 tons, but 50-50. So during all the lane changes, there wasn't really any sets of tyres that were worse than others. There was some that were slightly better, I guess, but if you want that data, I'm not going to bore you with it now. If you want that data, it will be on the Tyre Reviews website, linked in the description. So I think dry braking is probably way more important, so let's go look at that data.
Remarkably, the budget tyre was actually the best in dry braking, but the Pirelli in second place was just 0.17% behind, the Michelin in third place was 1.69% behind, and the fourth place Maxxis 2.85%.
As noise and comfort for an SUV is more important than for something like a sports car, I spent quite a lot of time doing subjective noise and comfort, but as always, things were very, very close. I also measured external noise too. In terms of overall subjective noise and comfort levels when driving, I thought the Michelin did an outstanding job, and the Bridgestone, Continental, Goodyear, Hankook and Nokian were also very good. The Pirelli was actually a very lovely sounding tyre inside. It had a low noise, low pitch, which was very kind to the ears, but it was a bit firmer than the best in the test. And if you want to avoid a tyre which crashes over too many impacts, that award goes to Maxxis. I'll put the external noise data on screen now, but again, the Michelin, Pirelli and Goodyear led the way, which is reassuring to know I'm getting better at subjective noise. Energy use is getting more and more important, and depending on how important it is to you, it can really change the overall results of this test. More on that in a bit. The Continental had such a massive lead in the rolling resistance test, I've never seen anything like it. Bridgestone was the next best, and then Hankook before quite a big gap to the rest of the tyres. If you have an EV, the Continental is absolutely the one to get. So the overall results, as always, I've applied what I believe to be a balanced score weighting applicable to SUVs in the winter, but I have reduced the rolling resistance weight down a little bit more than I had really wanted to, as I felt it was just having too much of an impact on the overall results. If you want to adjust the things to your own preference and get your own set of results, head over to the link in the description. It's to the Tyre Reviews website, and then you can adjust the score weighting there to make it perfect for you. And don't forget to subscribe. In last place was the cheap tyre. Shock. I'd say this would make a better all-season tyre as it was the best in dry braking, but it was the worst in all the wet grip tests, the worst in most of the snow tests, and was pretty noisy and uncomfortable. It did have the 4th best rolling resistance though. That doesn't make it worth it. In 8th place overall was the Maxxis Primera Snow WP6 SUV, which is quite the name. It was a nice handling tyre, it was predictable and stable and had good grip in the dry. However, sadly the grip in the wet and the snow just weren't quite up to scratch, and it had the 2nd worst rolling resistance, 30% higher than the best on test. The Goodyear Ultra Grip Performance Plus SUV was much better in the wet and in snow, having excellent grip in both categories, and was a comfortable tyre to drive on. As usual for this tyre, it was one of the worst in the dry, but unusually for this tyre, it also had the highest rolling resistance of the group and struggled in the aquaplaning test. It's still a good tyre, but as one of the older tyres in the group now, it's perhaps starting to show its age. The new Pirelli Scorpion Winter 2 was the best in the dry overall, the fastest around wet handling, though it couldn't quite match that in wet braking, good in the snow and one of the quietest tyres on test. It did struggle a little bit more in the deeper water of aquaplaning, and like the Goodyear, it didn't have great rolling resistance, but overall a good tyre, recommended. The new Nokian Snowproof 2 SUV almost matched the Pirelli overall on score, but did it in a totally different way. The The Nokian was one of the best tyres in the snow, the very best in deep water test of aquaplaning, which I assume should be good for slush, and was very quiet and comfortable. It wasn't perfect in the dry with the longest dry braking, but the margins were small and it was only mid-pack in wet handling and braking. But like in the dry, the margins weren't huge. Recommended. In joint third place overall was the Bridgestone Blizzak LM005 and the Hankook Winter Icept Evo 3X. The Hankook was an extremely well balanced tyre, one of the best around the dry handling lap, great in wet braking, the best in the snow and generally just a nice tyre to drive. It also had the third lowest rolling resistance on test. Where did it lose out? It wasn't the most comfortable or quietest of the group, but otherwise an amazing tyre, highly recommended. The Bridgestone matched the Hankook's overall result, but it was slightly better in the wet and slightly worse in the dry and the snow. But it was more comfortable and had an even lower rolling resistance. The LM005 once again proves it's one of the best winter tyres on the market, highly recommended. The Michelin Pilot Alpine 5 narrowly missed out on the top spot, but arguably it is actually the best winter tyre in the group. Let me explain how that works. The Michelin was the best in the snow, one of the best in the wet and one of the best in the dry. It was also the quietest and most comfortable, so why isn't it in first place? It could only muster 5th best in the rolling resistance score, and even with my reduction in the rolling resistance weighting, it was still 26% behind the gap to the first place, the Continental. The Michelin Pilot Alpine 5 is an incredible winter tyre, and once again I'm highly recommending it in this SUV size. And finally, the winner of this winter SUV test was the Continental Winter Contact TS870P. This tyre seems to have performed the impossible by blending a huge lead in rolling resistance with excellent grip in the dry, wet and snow. It couldn't quite match the Michelin in snow traction or dry braking, and it was mid-pack for noise, but it traded blows with the best in every other category. The amount of grip this tyre has while having such a huge advantage in rolling resistance makes this tyre the best tyre in this test, and if you drive an electric vehicle or are sensitive to the rising fuel costs, you shouldn't even consider any other option in this size. Remarkable work by Continental. So that's it. Let me know what winter tyre you're going to fit. Go review your summer tyres you're taking off at tyre-reviews.com. There's a huge amount of good winter content coming, so be sure to like and subscribe. Any questions, please ask below. And as always, safe motoring.